Yes, I can start. Yes. Yes, welcome to everyone for this conference and for this interesting ordinary session G called Monetary Policy, Inflation and Income Distribution. I'm Antonio Lofaro, the chair of this conference from Roma Tre University. And this session has three papers. The first paper is the impact of monetary policy on functional income distribution. A panel is via analysis that I'm the presenter. The second paper is group inequalities, a policy perspective presented by co-staff Banerjee, and sorry for my pronunciation. And the third paper is stress testing inflation exposure, systemically significant prices, and asymmetric shock propagation in the UA 28. The last paper presented by Orivam Ibiapina da Silva will be presented in the person conference. I would say that we can start if there aren't any problems from a technical point of view. Yes, I'm the first presenter. And I'm uploading my slides. Yes. Every presentation will have 15 minutes, and then we can have 2 minutes to gather some question from the audience with the help of our technical assistants. So I can start. This paper is co-authored with Stefano Di Bucchianico, University of Salerno, and the title is The Impact of Monetary Policy on Functional Income Distribution, a panel SVR analysis. In fact, after the 2008 crisis, major central banks have implemented strongly expansionary, conventional and unconventional monetary policy. For this, several policymakers and researchers have shown attention on the distributional effects of this monetary policy. However, there is no consensus in the literature of design of these distributional effects, and moreover, the literature is mainly focused on the effects of monetary policy on personal income distribution and not on functional income distribution. For this, our paper has three goals. The first is that to try to address the monetary policy effects on functional income distribution in terms of real wages and the labor share. And then we want to try to understand if these effects are permanent, are long-lasting on functional income distribution. Then we make use of a panel SVR methodology, and it's the first paper on this topic in the literature to apply this methodology on this topic. And we analyze 15 countries for a time span of 50 years. The third aim is that to pose special attention to try to decompose these distributional effects of the monetary policy in several channels, and we want to pay attention on these two channels, the cost channel and the labor market channel of monetary policy. As I already said, there is a lack in the literature of contribution on the effects, on the monetary policy effects on the functional income distribution, as pointed out by CAPES 2023. However, we have some paper like that of Cristiano et al. 1997 and 2005 that find that after a contractional monetary policy shock, real wages should decline. More recently, Cantor et al. 2021 indicate that a restrictive monetary policy shock can decrease both real wages and labor productivity. But the fall in labor productivity would be stronger than that on real wages. So we can have the result that at the end the labor share can increase after a monetary policy restriction. In this table, we tried to summarize this channel of the monetary policy on income for the effect on income distribution in three main channels. The first channel is the cost channel, in which a higher interest rate can increase the cost of working capital for firms, like pointed out by Bart and Rami, and we can have a higher price level for this channel, and with given nominal wages, with sticky nominal wages, we can have a fall in real wages. Then we can have an activity channel in which a monetary policy restriction can lower the GDP level, and then we can have a decrease in the labor productivity level, and an increase in the unemployment rate. So if there is an increase in this variable, in the unemployment rate, we can have a third channel of monetary policy, because we can get a worsening in the bargaining conditions of the worker, and so there could be a slower nominal wage growth, and we can have a reduction in the household spending. So at the end, we can highlight like there is a lower GDP level. So the effect of monetary policy on labor share seems to be more complex, because there are two main effects that that consist on the impact of monetary policy on real wages and the labor productivity level. For this, we can study from an empirical point of view these distributional effects of monetary policy, and we make use of annual data for a panel of 15 advanced economists during a period of 50 years that goes from 1917 to 2019. We make use of seven variables that are from Hamego dataset, OECD stats, and World Bank database. The first variable is the short-term interest rate. The second is a measure of commodity price index, like the energy commodities price index. The third variable is a measure of price level, like the GDP deflator. Then we have a measure of real wages, the real gross domestic product, the unemployment rate, and the adjusted labor share. In terms of methodology, we use a panel structural vector autoregressive PSVR model inspired to the seminal work of Pedroni 2013, and the fundamental issue in this methodology is that to put some restriction in the matrix B0, that is the matrix of contemporaneous relationship of our variables. To put this restriction in the matrix B0, we use a Cholesky factorization, and for the Cholesky factorization, the ordering of the variables is very important, and we place like the first variable the interest rate, like we can see in the impulse in this impulse response function, and this means that the interest rate is a variable that can have an effect within the first year of the monetary policy shock on the other variables, but the interest rate is a variable that can react with a one lag to the other shock of the other variable. We make this assumption, we choose this ordering inspired to seminal work like that of Sims 1992 and Fragetta and Melina 2013. So these are our impulse response function that are calculated with a confidential interval following the works of Pedroni, with interval calculated with the 25th and 75th percent quantile responses among the 15 countries. So we can have a restrictive monetary policy shock that can cause a positive response of the price level that after 10 years increases up to 170 basis points. So there is a long-lasting effect of monetary policy shock on price level, and this could motivate the existence of a cost channel of monetary policy. Then we have also a negative effect on activity level of monetary policy restriction, because there is a decrease in the GDP level, and there is an increase in the unemployment rate that after 10 years would increase up to 0.22%. This the increase in the unemployment rate and this increase in the price level could motivate the negative response of the real wages to a positive monetary policy shock, because we can see how the response of the real wages is permanent and long-lasting, influenced by the monetary policy. In fact, the real wages after 10 years would decrease up to 0.56%, minus 0.56%, and this could motivate how the monetary policy can have a structural non-neutral effect on the functional income distribution. Then we can analyze the response of the labor share And the labor share response seems more complex because, in line with the results of Cantore 2021, we can have a first phase in which we can have an increase in the labor share because probably labor productivity is decreasing more than real wages. But then we can see from the real wages response, real wages are decreasing in a steady way. So the labor share in a second phase could move back to its pre-shock level. So we can see how there is an important effect on unemployment rate by from monetary policy restriction. And so for this, we can study indirect effects that pass through the unemployment rate. So monetary policy shock can have an increasing effect on unemployment rate, and which is the impact on the functional income distribution of this increasing effect on unemployment rate. We can see in this impulse response function how a positive unemployment rate shock can cause a decrease in the real wages, and both in real wages and in the labor share. So these variables after 10 years would decrease up to minus 156 basis points. And this decrease seems to us to be permanent. So there is a permanent effect of monetary policy for the labor market channel on the functional income distribution. In terms of robustness check, we have tried several checks. Like for example, we pay attention on the use on generalized impulse response function inspired to the seminal work of Pesar and Shin 1998. Where is not important the ordering of the variables, unlike to the Cholesky decomposition. We use also a shadow interest rate measure, and we use several subperiods and subsamples from various countries. However, our results robust to these checks. Our conclusions are several. The first conclusion is that monetary policy can have a long-lasting influence on the functional income distribution. Then, in line with Christian et al. 2005, for the existence of a cost channel of monetary policy, we can find there is a non-transitory fall in real wages after a monetary policy contraction. So there is a permanent effect of monetary policy. Then, in line with Cantore et al. 2021, we can have a more complex effect of the monetary policy on labor share, because initially the labor share would rise, but then it steadily reverses by returning over our horizon to its pre-shock level. But last but not least, we paid more attention to the existence of a labor market channel of monetary policy, in which there is an increase in unemployment rate after a monetary policy restriction, and this increase in unemployment rate consisting in a worsening on the bargaining power of the worker could cause a decreasing in both real wages and the labor share. Future developments of our analysis that we would like to implement in the next months is that to use nonlinear methods of estimation like the threshold SVR model to try to understand if there is some different response of functional income distribution variables to a monetary policy shock, and if this difference can be detached in the degree of labor market rigidity using some important measure like the EPL and the unionization density. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you, Antonino, very much for this very nice presentation on an extremely relevant topic. You are the chair of our session, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know if you want to address questions of the other participants of the session, or maybe there are questions from the YouTube. I have a couple of questions of my own, and maybe I could share them with you, or you are the boss here. You tell me how should we proceed.
Yeah, maybe before I can see for some question from YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can see for on YouTube. No, there aren't any questions, so you can go.
So let me jump in. And your findings are very provocative, and I was wondering a couple of clarifications actually. So first, I was a little bit surprised to see that a contractionary monetary policy would initially increase the wage share, and this effect. So you have an initial increase that later on goes to zero, but still the initial positive effect is there. So I was wondering, what is the mechanism that you think is driving these results? And then second, I think one of the main findings that you guys try to highlight is the cost channel of monetary policy, right? So contractionary monetary policy actually increasing prices and having the opposite desired effect on unemployment. Well, at least on prices. Let's stop there. So what again is the main force that is driving this result in your findings in comparison to other studies that actually find that a contractionary monetary policy reduces inflation? So what is happening in your setup that is reverting that conventional result? Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your question, Marvin. Yes, so for the first question about the labor share is yes, is a bit complex result because we are used to think that monetary policy restriction can reduce the labor share for the worker, but in the first phase we can see how there is an increase in the labor share, as you already said. And the mechanism would be that there is probably a more negative effects on the labor productivity compared to the negative effects on the real wages. So given that the labor share is the ratio of the real wages on the labor productivity, so the more negative effects on labor productivity should cause an increase in this ratio in the labor share. After that, real wages is steadily falling also in a longer horizon. You should have the labor share that is moving back to its pre-shock level. And so this is the mechanism.
Okay, so if you allow me, just because you mentioned labor productivity, so your answer would go in the direction of labor productivity, because initially I thought that maybe it could be something related to the wealth channel, because when you have a contractionary monetary policy, the price of your asset is coming down. So somehow in the short term, the income that you receive from that wealth part of it is falling, and then you will have the contraposition of that. If your profit share is falling, the contraposition will be the wage share temporarily increasing. But I don't know if that makes sense. And just because you mentioned labor productivity, and while I was reading your hearing your results, I thought about the wealth channel. Sorry.
No. Yeah. Thank you. It's absolutely a good insight from you. Because our work is inspired a bit of work of Cantor et al. 2021, and this work finds this explanation for these complex movements in the labor share. But for sure, we can also pay attention on this alternative explanation on wealth effects, on wealth channel of monetary policy. Yes, absolutely. And thank you. And for the second question about the cost channel of monetary policy, yes, is a strange effect for the traditional view of the monetary policy effects. But there are a lot of works, mainly empirical works in the literature that should detach the existence of a positive relationship between interest rate and price level, because interest rates are an important component of the cost of for the films. So if a central bank increase permanently the interest rate, the cost, the financial cost for the films could increase, and for this we could explain the existence of a positive relationship between interest rate and price level. But recently, also from works from the Federal Reserve, there is another explanation from this positive relationship that works with the rents, because mainly in the short term, after a monetary policy restriction, the rents could increase, and the rents would be an important component of the CPI, of the consumer price index. And so this mechanism could explain in another way the existence of a positive relationship between price level and interest rate. I don't know if there are other questions, and I hope that I gave you good.
Definitely.
Thank you. Thank you.
Maybe we can invite the next speaker to jump in.
Yeah.
Leonard Ibsen, right?
Yeah. Yes. The next speaker is Leonard. No, is Kostav Banerjee. Okay, the next.
I'm not sure if she is still here, so.
Okay, yes, we can see your slides. Thank you. And you have 15 minutes for your presentation. Good luck.
Thank you, and hello to everyone. My name is Leonard Ibsen. I'm a PhD student from the university in Bamberg, Germany. It is a pleasure to be invited to speak to you in Brasilia and also to the people joining online. As you can infer from the title of our presentation, the joint work of Armin Arminian, Jan Schulz, and I adapts a EU perspective. So we are extremely happy to be given the chance of getting your feedback and hopefully a broader perspective on our proposals. Okay, so inflation in the EU is back. And it was a long time coming if you ask economists who try to deduce inflationary pressure from charts like the one on the left. However, I would argue recent history went out of its way to tell us supply and production networks matter, and they matter not only for supply and production, but also for prices. The infamous Ever Given blocking the Suez Canal is one of the more tragic comic events that put a strain on production networks lately. There also was the shortage of semiconductors. We had the in and outs of pandemic-related lockdown policies. And we also saw Russia invading the Ukraine, which brought upon incredible suffering and also a sharp increase in energy prices. Okay, so you might think this anecdotal evidence and the slide lacks some scientific rigor, and of course, rightfully so. Luckily, Isabella Weber and co-authors put forth a seminal paper in 2022 showing the systemic significance of some sectors for the overall price level in the US, the so-called systemically significant prices. Okay, so we took the lead and asked ourselves, what if indeed inflation might emerge from microshocks to supply chains rather than as a monetary phenomenon? And what if indeed exposure to inflation is asymmetric across households, is asymmetric across sectors, as put forth by Weber et al., and maybe it's also asymmetric across regions. Why bother with regions? Because as we can see already from this very stylized depiction of the EU production network, they're quite heterogeneous with a really dense core and a not so dense periphery, and they are also very, very interlinked. So if production networks matter for inflation and display asymmetric exposures, could we stress test it? Could we stress test inflation exposure through global production networks? Well, we did, and we tried to stress test inflation exposure for the EU 28 in a global production network, and this is how we went about it. So we take the World Input-Output Database, which comprises sector-level data for 56 sectors of 43 countries each for the years 2000 to 2014. We simulate the inflation impact of the average producer price volatility for each sector on the overall price level in the EU 28 by a Leontief price model. We analyze the direct and indirect effects of these shocks. Direct effect meaning how does a price shock to a sector translates into a rising consumer price inflation due to its direct share in it? And indirect effect meaning how does a price shock to a sector translate into rising consumer price inflation due to the price shock propagating along production networks to other sectors? We then analyze the exposure to different volatilities for core and periphery regions. We trace the shock propagation within and in between core and periphery regions. And finally, we propose a novel method to recover consumption substitution effects for the core and periphery, respectively. Our results confirm Weber and co-authors' findings of strong and heterogeneous direct and indirect effects, as well as the existence of systemically significant prices, meaning there are sectors that take a crucial role in propagating price shocks either through their direct or their indirect effects on the consumption shares. We additionally find asymmetric shock trajectories not only between sectors, but also geographically. And we discover heterogeneous vulnerabilities due to asymmetric exposure and differential substitution effects. Asymmetric exposure can come in the form of exposure to, of course, qualitatively different sectors, to more or less sectors quantitatively, to more or less volatile sector, and because of the mentioned substitution possibilities. As in Weber et al. 2022, we use a Leontief price model to determine the inflation impact of price volatilities. So the basic identity is that the value of output of each industry is equal to the value of inputs plus the value added. The value of inputs is given by the quantity and price of the input, as well as the technical coefficient A, which can be understood as a ratio of inputs from sector I to the overall production of sector J. Fixing these technical coefficients allows us to simulate the effects of either changes in prices or quantities, with us now being interested in prices. When we take the matrix form of the basic identity and divide by total industry output, we get the price per unit of output P, and solving for P, we arrive at the Leontief price inverse times the value added, which allows the model to determine prices endogenously. We then use sigma as an average price volatility to get an idea of the total impact of a change in prices of sector I to the overall price level. We compute this using the consumption share CI as a proxy for consumer price inflation. Repeating this exercise for different compilations of consumption shares, namely for the EU28 as a whole and for the core and periphery respectively, we arrive at the impact of the average price volatility of each sector on the overall price level. Okay, now coming to the results. On this slide, you see the 10 most important sectors for the EU28. You see that real estate activities in the biggest economies play an important role, as well as energy sectors, but also Great Britain as a financial hub. If you look at the direct and indirect effects, you see that the real estate works primarily through its direct effect, while energy sectors also show a large indirect effect through their role of providing universal intermediate inputs. The total direct to indirect effect is approximately 1 to 2. The picture does not change too much when we look at the direct and indirect effects for the core. We lose the Polish sector of coke and refined petroleum and see that the real estate, energy, and also financial services dominate. When looking at the total effect, we see that the direct effect becomes more important. Okay, now compare this to the results for the periphery. We see an increased importance of energy sectors, which comes with a larger indirect effect. We also see some sectors of food production and services entering the picture. And if you look at the scaling of the x-axis, we see a larger volatility in this upper tail compared to the core. We already saw in the previous slides that even for the 10 most impactful sectors, their effects are quite heterogeneous themselves. When we plot this systematically, we see that the distribution is heavily skewed, pointing to the existence of systemically significant prices. For the core, you see that the 2% industries with the highest impact account for 50% of the total contribution to consumer price inflation. For the periphery, it is 4% accounting for 50%, which is still very asymmetric. This could, on the one hand, suggest that the core is more prone to particular shocks than the periphery. On the other hand, if you think about addressing these sectors policy-wise, the periphery needs to cover more ground. In any case, we should probably have a discussion about whether monetary policy can address these sectors or if we should come up with a different set of policies. Okay, so far we established that there are sectors that are significantly more important for the aggregate price level due to their sheer size or their position in the production network. We also saw that these sectors and the direct and indirect effects are qualitatively different for the core and the periphery of the EU28. And now we want to take a closer look at these asymmetric volatilities. We see that the periphery experiences larger direct and indirect effects, resulting also in a larger overall effect. Note that that we already normalized the number of sectors of core to periphery. So, for example, if every sector would experience its average price volatility, the total inflation impact for the core would be 12.9% compared to 16.5% for the periphery. Okay, so where do these asymmetric volatilities stem from? One reason might be found in different dependencies between core and periphery. Here we follow the famous definition of Dos Santos, 1970, quote, "By dependence, we mean a situation in which the economy of certain countries is conditioned by the development and expansion of another economy to which the former is subjected." To test this, we decompose the shock trajectories to be able to see the effects propagating within the core and periphery, as well as from the core to the periphery and from the periphery to the core. On the left column, which is in green, you see the effects propagating within the core, which is the blue print, and within the periphery, which is the red print. We see that the within propagation is quite similar for core to core and periphery to periphery, respectively. However, when we look at the second column, which is pink, we see that the shock propagation from the core to the periphery is significantly more pronounced than vice versa. And this is especially true for the indirect effect. We also see in the third column that the periphery is importing more indirect effects from outside the EU 28 than the core. A second reason for the higher volatilities in the periphery could be due to different substitution effects. This could be the case if consumers in the core are able to substitute away from volatile sectors, while the consumers in the periphery are less able to do so. Starting from the direct impact part of our model, we can decompose this part into the mean price volatility sigma p bar and the cross-sectional covariance between the consumption shares and the price volatilities. If the last term would become negative, there would be a negative correlation between consumption share and price volatility in a sector, which implies the possibility of substituting away from these sectors. And indeed, we see a negative covariance for the core, while the peripheries is basically non-existing. So the direct effect in the core is approximately 1/6 lower due to the possibility of substitution. Concluding, we took the lead of Weber et al. 2022, who showed the existence of systemically significant prices in the US production network. We extended this approach to stress test the EU 28 on a global basis for these systemically significant prices, as well as for other asymmetric shock exposures. We confirm Weber et al.'s finding and additionally show there to be asymmetric geographical exposure within the EU 28 core and periphery. This comes through exposure to qualitatively different sectors, through different levels of direct and indirect effects, through exposure to more or less sectors quantitatively, through exposure to more or less volatile sectors, and also through differences in the substitution effects between core and periphery. With that, I want to thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to receive your questions. And please feel also free to reach out to us via the following channels. Thank you.
Thank you, Leonard, for the very interesting presentation for a very important issue for our situation. There is a question from Marvin. Yes, Marvin.
No. I mean, I can be the last one. I don't know if in the YouTube we have something, or maybe you also, Antonino.
Okay. Yeah. No, on YouTube there is no question.
Okay, so Antonino will come after me because I will jump. And Leonard, right? Am I pronouncing it right?
I think it's fine enough for this.
It's fine enough. Okay, thank you. No, very kind. And the presentation is a very relevant topic. And while you were talking, and you have a completely different take, right, on inflation, and you're exploring these input-output connections that are very interesting. And in my mind, I was thinking about Isabella Weber momentum, right? And she's talking about supply side inflation, and she's been talking about profit inflation. And I was wondering if your story somehow relates to her story on this profit inflation.
Yeah, so we basically took the first step and followed her lead there with the supply side inflation and looking at the supply side relevance for price shocks. What we didn't incorporate in this setup is something like profit inflation, because we assume with the Leontief price model that there's no substitution in between the sectors and that the prices are fully passed on through the network. So in the next step, we could think about changing this up so that maybe some sectors pass on more price shocks than others, and maybe that obviously might depend on something like market power. But I think it's not trivial to incorporate this in this setup. So, but it would be definitely a really interesting aspect.
A next step, maybe. No, thank you very much.
For sure. Thanks for the question.
There is no question from YouTube, so I have another question, because you put in your analysis, you paid a lot of much attention about the real estate sector. Usually, restrictive monetary policies have a negative effect on this sector. Do you think that monetary policy can have any influence on in your analysis, mainly considering the difference between the European countries in terms of financial structure also? Thank you.
Yeah, I think that you already pointed out the crucial aspects of it. So the real estate sectors seem to be quite important in our analysis, and even more so than compared to the US, if we look at the results. So, and you could argue that monetary policy does have an impact on these kind of sectors. So you would expect that this is something that can be addressed from monetary policy, maybe better than the other sectors that came up, like the energy sectors. I'm not sure if it's a trivial correlation, though, because the housing aspects of real estate are also not only the prices of the real estate, but also like the rent level. And I'm not sure if there's a correlation is really close for monetary policy to something like the rent level. But that's there I'm out of my depth. So I think focusing on this channel would be probably a worthwhile endeavor.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leonard. And then I think that we are having another presentation from co-staff Banerjee. Is online. Is not online. Okay. Okay, so okay, so I think that we can conclude our session. Thank you for thank you to the thanks to the audience, and good luck to everyone. Good have a good conference. Bye.